Hello and welcome back. In this module, we're going to make a web page look even better using the Bootstrap framework. What is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework for developing responsive and mobile-first projects on the web. Bootstrap makes front-end development faster and easier, and it's made for folks of all skill levels, devices of all shapes, and projects of all sizes. In a nutshell, it's a simple way to get your web page looking great in no time at all. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So the objective today is we're going to refactor the existing website using Bootstrap for layout. So we're going to replace some of the code that we already have and end up using Bootstrap to make it look a lot nicer. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add Bootstrap to our website. In order to begin using Bootstrap on our web page, we need to include it in our web page. There are two pieces to the Bootstrap framework: the style sheets and the JavaScript files. We could download both of these to our working folder, but for now, we are going to use a content delivery network to give us the version of Bootstrap that we want. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code, and it defaulted to the last file that we edited, and let me go ahead and zoom in a few times here. Okay, so now that we're all zoomed in, and if I go back to the actual Bootstrap site, the code that we're going to put is on the site under the Getting Started section. So you can reference it right from here or from the online documents that we have provided. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this from the documents that we provided. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to copy these two lines that I have that's in the reference material, and I'm going to paste them right above app.css. Actually, what I'm going to do to give myself a little bit more room here is I'm going to close the working files. There we go. So now I'm using the entire screen for code. At this point, nothing has changed on our page. Adding the Bootstrap file gave us access to the CSS classes that will define how our page gets laid out on different devices. Adding containers. Bootstrap is based on having a container element to wrap all of the site contents and manage the rows that will lay out the 12-column grid system. And in regards to the 12-column grid system, if you actually go to the website, it's getbootstrap.com is the website. You click on the CSS link, and then on the right-hand side, there's a link for grid system. You can scroll down, and it really goes into detail on how this grid system works. We're not going to go into specifics, but what I will show you is basically using Bootstrap, we lay out each page with a total of 12 columns. And so basically, when you put a piece together using these columns, or I'm sorry, when you put a web page together using these columns, if you make sure that your columns add up to 12 total, Bootstrap will do all the magic behind the scenes to resize it down to a mobile device or a tablet device if the browser resizes. So just think of it again of 12 columns, but say you only need a left and a right column, you can have a left column that's 8 wide and a right column that's 4 wide, and together it's 12, and Bootstrap will work its magic. Again, we'll go into this and we're going to show you how to do this now. So the first thing we're going to do is use the container fluid class to make a full width container that will resize based on the size of the browser viewport. Let's start by adding this class to our page header. So if I go to the header, and I'm going to say class equals container dash fluid. Next, let's do the same around the main part of our web page, including the both aside and section tags that contain the bulk of the page content. Since we're working with 3 groups of tags, add a div tag to wrap all of the page content not in the header or the footer. So I'll show you how to do this. So we're going to start here, and I'll do div class equals container dash fluid. And then I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom just before the footer, and I'm going to do a closing div tag. And as usual, I'm going to highlight everything, and I'm going to hit tab to indent it nicely. Finally, let's go ahead and add the container fluid class to your footer. So go ahead and save your web page now, and let's view it in the browser. Resize the width of your browser and see how the header and footer resize as well as the content of the page. Okay, so here's the web page we created. Notice a couple things first. Before I go ahead and resize it to demonstrate, notice the font change. This is the default Bootstrap font. It's a little bit cleaner than the standard Times New Roman, so already it's looking a little bit better. So if I minimize this, and you'll see as I move everything, we don't have much in the page, but Bootstrap is making sure everything collapses nicely based on the size of the viewport. Okay, so now let's go ahead and we want to add some navigation. Just under our header, we are going to use Bootstrap to add a navigation menu to our page. We'll keep it simple, but Bootstrap will take care of everything for us, including the highlights and layout. So again, I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to locate my header, and I'm going to go ahead and paste the code from the exercise file right inside of here. And again, I'll indent it so it looks good. And now before we take a look at the navigation we just added, let's add some simple styling to our app.css file. So again, I'm going to go to my Explorer. I'll choose app.css. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the following items from our exercise files. So we added a class to the nav, a class around the section and article, and then a class around that will take care of the image tag. So let's save both files. And again, I'll collapse my Explorer there. And let's go back to the page and let's take a look to see what it looks like. So here we go. So now you'll see a couple things have happened. Notice the new navigation menu. As you resize your browser to a narrow window, you will see that the menu items go from being on the same line to being on their own lines. Thanks to Bootstrap, we don't have to spend a lot of time building this custom menu functionality. So I'll show you that right here. So you'll see as I shrink the page down, you see now how they're on their own lines. And again, if I expand the page out, they go back to being across. In regards to the menu, we will add the content for the contact link a little bit later in this module. So let's get back to Bootstrap layouts. Now for the rows. Next, we want to move on to the main content of our web page. Once we have our containers, we can create a row inside of that container. That row will be the basis for our 12 columns in our grid. Anytime we are working with a row, we want to keep in mind that the number of columns should always add up to 12. In our example web page, we want to have the first list take up 3 columns, the main content take up the next 6 columns, and finally our second list to fill the final 3 columns. In the index.html, just after the div surrounding your main content, let's add another div and give it a class of row. So I'm going to go here. This is our main div, and we're going to add in div class equals row. And now what we need to do is we need to close off that div at the bottom. So here's the other closing div. So I'll add another div tag right here. And again, like I always do, I'm going to highlight everything inside of here and I'll indent it. We are now ready to subdivide the row with our content into the columns. Change both of the aside tags to have a class of col-sm3. So I'll show you that right here. So we'll put in class equals col-sm-3. So let me go to I'm just going to copy this and I'll go down to the other aside tag and I'll paste that in there. And then that will account for 6 of the columns in our grid. So now we want to change the main section of our content to have a class of col-sm-6 to account for the 6 columns. So I'll go here to the top of the section. I'll paste the class in and I'll change that 3 to a 6. Save and view index.html in your browser. So we'll do that now, and I'll refresh. Notice that the 2 lists we created now float to the right and left of our main content. What happens when you resize the window to a narrow screen similar to a phone? Our content automatically reflows as necessary. Again, this is the magic of Bootstrap. So here you see a larger layout where we have left, middle, right, and then we have our navigation going across. And then as I resize it down, Bootstrap automatically stacks everything on top of each other and lines it up so that it looks correct on a tablet or on a mobile phone. Now that the content flows a little better when we resize the browser, let's take a closer look at our main content. We're going to make the content of the articles flow a little nicer with devices as well. So in the index.html, let's add a div with a class of row to the main section. So again, right after the main section, we'll do div class equals row. And then we'll add the closing div tag right before the closing section. And again, I'm going to indent everything. This will give us another row with a 12-column grid that we can begin to lay each article out. Let's make the image take up 3 columns and the paragraphs fit in the other 9 columns. We're going to repeat this layout for each of the articles on the page. So here we go. So around my image, div class equals col-sm-3. And then around my paragraph, div class equals col-sm-9. And I'll indent this as well. So I'm going to copy these to the other guys. Save your work and load the index.html file in a browser. Try resizing the browser and notice how the articles now flow nicely even on very narrow screens. So if I open this up, you'll see the images to the left, text is to the right, titles up top, and then as I flow this, or if I resize the window, you see everything automatically rearranges itself so that it will fit properly in a smaller window. Again, this is the magic of Bootstrap at work. Bootstrap push and pull. Thankfully, Bootstrap has a few classes that allow us to flow the content where it needs to go. We put the content in the order we want it to flow, and then we use Bootstrap classes to tweak the details for the layout. First, let's modify the page so that the main content within the section tag comes first, followed by the 2 aside tags. So to do this, I'm just simply going to cut the first aside tag, and I'm going to place it right after the section. So now if we open this up in a browser, it doesn't look right quite yet, but you'll see we have the content comes first, then things to do, then how to get there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the push and pull classes to let the browser know how we want things to lay out based on whether it's a full browser window or if it's a mobile-sized window. So for the section class, we're going to add an additional class called col-sm-push-3. And then on that first aside, we're going to add col-sm-pull-6. Save and reload the page and look at the difference between the narrow width and the wide width browsers. Notice how the most important content is where it needs to be for each type of display. So again, on the larger layout, you see the contents in the middle, things to do on the left, how to get there on the right, and as we shrink this down, it automatically shows it so that the main content comes first and then the additional information below. Now that you've seen how to do column push and pull, let's add the content for our contact information. Because we added a link to our contact information, we will want to put in some HTML for that at the bottom of our page. we're going to copy the code for our contact section from the exercise file. So I've copied it, and now I'm going to go ahead and paste it here right above the footer and make sure it lines up. Notice that putting the name tag on the A attribute, it becomes a hyperlink that I can quickly forward a user to. So let's save your work and reload the page. And if I click on the contact link, you'll see it brings me down to the contact information at the bottom of the page. And again, make sure the behavior works both in the mobile layout as well as in the full layout. So if I go here and I refresh it and I click contact, you see it brings me back down to the contact information. To close out this module, let's check in our changes and push them up to Azure. You should already be set up for this from the previous modules, so if you haven't done the push to Azure before, you will need to back up and do that module first. So let's go ahead and open up our command prompt. And again, we need to first browse to the folder. I'm going to use the same trick we did before, which was I'm going to go to the folder, and then I click here in the address bar, and I'm able to copy that. And then I can type in cd space, and I'll paste that in there. So I'm going to do the command git add period, then git commit -m, and add a comment, added Bootstrap styling. Okay, and it shows there 2 files were changed. And I'm going to do git push Azure master, and it should prompt me for a password. There it is. So I'm going to put my password in. This will take a second. Okay, it shows it's successful. So now if I browse to my demo website, which is choose to code demo.azurewebsites.net, and I refresh the page, you'll see, there we go. Now I've pushed up my latest version of the file with the Bootstrap styling, and it's fully responsive and it's working real well. So I hope you learned a little bit about Bootstrap today. Again, we just scratched the surface. I would highly recommend you visit getbootstrap.com and go through all the documentation on the site. They have some of the best documentation out there. It really just walks you through how to, the typography, how to use the grid system, laying out tables, buttons, forms, everything. It's something really good to go through. Thanks again, and we will see you in the next module.